series of lessons on the church history. We looked at two topics that were very, very different. One, the Crusades, and then on the other hand, the development of monasticism and the positive attributes that came out of the monastic movement. Today, we once again look at two developments that occurred. One absolutely wretched beyond description, and yet on the other hand, another topic that we literally depend upon for our education system today. We will get to that here in just a moment. This is the second part of the Middle Ages, our study of the Middle Ages. And so this morning we're going to look at the Inquisition, and the beginning of the second half of our lesson this morning will be the beginning of Scholasticism, which continued for centuries. How many of you know anything at all or much at all about the Inquisition? You ever even heard the term?
Heard the term, yes.
I've heard of it. I know that a lot of people, a lot of the Jewish people converted to Catholicism during that time and came over here. So our Catholic groups here have a background with the conversios.
My only real introduction to the Inquisition, and perhaps many folks can share this, came through Man of La Mancha, the story Miguel de Cervantes, Don Quixote. And it is set during the Inquisition, the days of the Inquisition, and Miguel de Cervantes, his character Don Quixote, is arrested because he's putting on this little play, which the Grand Inquisition, the Inquisitors deemed to be heretical. And so if you're familiar at all with the movie Man of La Mancha, it's an incredibly brief and incomplete introduction to the Inquisition. David Schaff has this sentence in his book on his volume on history of the Christian Church, that the history of the Inquisition presents what is probably, and that is an understatement, the most revolting spectacle in the annals of civilized Europe. When you really get into the Inquisition and what the Inquisition was and how it was persecuted, is just simply unimaginable. The purpose of the Inquisition was to repress and to exterminate heresy. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't want heretics to grow and to flower and to bloom and to spread. So we want heresy to be rooted out. So the goal might be, at least on one level, to be something good. However, it's when we get into the methods that we have all kinds of problems. Initially, the Inquisition simply demanded acts of penance. And depending on the level of the infraction, the act of penance would be greater or lesser. But soon that became not enough. And so you would move to imprisonment. And then, if that wasn't enough, the forfeiture of property. And then torture. And then finally death. And then, if that wasn't enough, if you were dead, and even dead for a long period of time, if your writings, if your teachings were deemed to be heretical, your bones were exhumed and burned, just so that everybody knew that you were a heretic. And so, this is something that, you could be dead for a couple of 100 years, I guess. But if something that you wrote a couple of 100 years ago was later determined to be heretical, the church had to purge you, and the church had to purge your teaching. And so you were exhumed, your bones were exhumed, and they were burned, so that all of your writings would be burned. And so this is one of the reasons why we do not really know what some of the teachings that were declared to be heretical, we don't have the actual words of the heretic. So we don't know if what they said was really heretical. All we have are the surviving teachings and commentaries of those who disagreed with those who were deemed to be heretical. And are you kind of familiar with the teaching that history was written by the victors? All history was written by the victors? Well, you can distort what your enemy says, and if he's dead, he can't correct you. And so we have to kind of depend on the writings of the victors, the victorious, to try to understand what some of these heretics were trying to teach, whether their teachings were heretical or not. In fact, we get down to the bottom of the page, you and I today would be considered heretical. And if we were living in the 1600s, chances are we would be not only persecuted, but very likely executed for what we believe, because our beliefs would be considered heretical to the church that was in power at that particular time. Obviously, the elimination of heresy was a primary concern of the popes for a couple of reasons. Number one, they would say that they were acting to preserve the purity of the church, but very closely connected to that would be the preservation of their power. You don't want any teaching to diminish your power. And so if somebody came up and said, hey, it says here in Scripture, thus and such. Well, if that conflicted with your power, you're a heretic, and I got to get rid of you. Because if people start believing what you teach, I will lose my power. So they would claim, obviously, that they were working to keep the purity of the church. And I found this to be somewhat ironic. The most energetic, according to David Schaff, the most energetic pope who went about prosecuting the Inquisition went by the name Pope Innocent. I found that to be highly ironic that a pope who would choose the name Pope Innocent III would have his name attached to the Inquisition. Be that as it may. In 1227, Pope Gregory IX gave the power of the punishment of the heretics to the monastic orders. We talked a little bit about this last week, But because the monastic orders, primarily the Franciscans and the Dominicans, although there were a couple of other mendicant orders, other monks, because they were directly under the authority of the Pope and only answered to the Pope, he could control them, and their devotion was then to the Pope. Their allegiance was to the Pope. They were outside of the control of regional bishops, priests, anything. And so they didn't have to answer to civil authorities. They didn't have to answer to church authorities. They only had to answer directly to the Pope. And so that was one way that the Pope could maintain control, not only over the church, but specifically over the Inquisition. Later, just a few years later, 1232, that power was even more directly related to, or directly given to the Dominicans. I don't think it was exclusively the role of the Dominicans, but the Dominicans kind of assumed this role of the Grand Inquisition. Dominic was given the title, or the Dominicans were given the title, the Hammer of the Heretics. I kind of mentioned that just a little bit last week. The role of the Inquisitor, the Inquisitor was police. In other words, they arrested you for heresy. At the at the accusation of anybody could accuse you of being a heretic. But once you were accused of heresy, you were subject then to the Inquisition. So the Inquisitor was police. They arrested you, but they were also the prosecutor. And just to make sure nothing got fouled up, they were also the judges. Isn't that a neat system? The police arrested you, the police served as the prosecuting attorney, and the police and the Inquisitor served as the judge. What chance did you have? You could plead guilty or be found guilty. And that was the terror that reigned during this time period.
Almost sounds like the Salem witch trials.
We'll get there. But that's exactly what happened, Darren.
So all the civil authorities were under the church rule.
Pretty much. Now, and that gets me to the next bullet point, Cricket, that the church formally never punished anyone. The church never tortured or killed anyone. But what they did was they would excommunicate you as a heretic, hand you over to the civil authorities. Well, what are the civil authorities going to do? Oh, it's okay. You're just charged with heresy. I'll let you go. Their livelihood depended on supporting the Pope, the church. Otherwise, they would be accused of heresy, right? So, yeah, you can have this umbrella, this idea, this concept of, oh, we're innocent. We never tortured anybody. We never killed anybody. Now, if all you had to do was acts of penance, walk around carrying a cross, or, and here, going back to last week, the Crusades, one of the ways that you could absolve yourself of the sin of heresy was to sign up and go on one of these crusades, right? So that was one of the ways that the church could purify. But when it really came down to torture, uh, the confiscation of property, even and especially death, all that was handed over to the quote unquote civil authorities, who were pretty much directly under the authority of the church. So it's a very, very circular argument. And this is something I found to be fascinating years and years and years ago when I first kind of got into it and read about this. The Roman Catholic Church has never formally ended the office of the Inquisition. So technically, according to Roman Catholic, what do you call it? The magisterium of the church, they could basically impose these same punishments for heresy today. Pretty much, they just ignore you. The Pope or a cardinal or a bishop, archbishop might write a letter and say this person is no longer. They would excommunicate somebody and perhaps banish somebody, but in terms of taking their property or sending them to prison for heresy, that's not going to happen today. Now, going back to Darren's comment, the activity of punishing heretics didn't stop with the Roman Catholic Church. It has continued virtually, I don't want to say in every single religious group, but John Calvin, who we will get to here in 2 or 3 lessons, would do the same thing in Geneva, Switzerland. He would decide, or the church would decide, not necessarily always John Calvin, but the church would decide that somebody was a heretic, and then hand that person over to the state, the civil authorities of Geneva, Switzerland, and allow the state then to punish them. But once again, if that state civil authority is directly under the authority and the power of that state church, what are they going to do? Are they going to disagree with and free a heretic? They're just going to let the heretic go free? No. And so one of the if you read much about John Calvin, you come across the situation with Michael Servetus. And John Calvin did not like what Michael Servetus was saying, writing, teaching, and so he decided that Michael Servetus was a heretic. He had Michael Servetus declared to be a heretic and handed him over to the state civil authorities, who promptly burned him at the stake. That's life in Calvin's Switzerland. The Anabaptists, primarily, I believe, in Switzerland, where Calvinism was the most had the most political power. The Anabaptists were horribly persecuted. And one, I don't want to say the only reason that the Anabaptists were persecuted, but one of the major teachings of the Anabaptists was the idea that baptism was for adults only. And if you were baptized as an infant and you later came to realize that baptism was for adults and based on your faith, and you were rebaptized, that's what the word Anabaptist means, rebaptism. So if you were rebaptized into the Anabaptist church, you were a heretic. And if you taught that baptism was only for adults and based on a statement of faith, you were a heretic. And to add insult to injury, the way you get rid of an Anabaptist, because they were so fond of adult baptism, you drowned them. And so Anabaptists were drowned. They weren't burned at the stake. They weren't hung on the gallows. No, we're going to take you out in the middle of the lake and we're going to drown you. So don't just think that the repression of heresy is connected only to the Roman Catholic Church. The Puritans in England suffered horribly, even to the extent of being executed. So one of the reasons for the Puritan migration to the United States was to escape persecution. So what did they do in New England? They persecuted the witches. And depending on what colony you were in, if you were a Roman Catholic, you were persecuted. And if you didn't believe right straight down the line, you were, if you were considered, if you violated any kind of puritanical, what we call puritanical church law, they had the stocks out there in front of, in the village square, and you would be punished. You would be locked out there in the stocks. What else are they called? Anyway, so it's one of these weird things of history is that those who are persecuted very often become persecutors. Think about what happened in the early years of the church. Christians were persecuted because they were atheists. They didn't believe in the gods. Therefore, we have to exterminate them. We have to get rid of them. We put them out there and have the lions eat them, or whatever it was that early Christians. So here we are 1,000 years later, and Christians are persecuting who they consider to be non-Christians. And a couple of hundred years later, John Calvin and other reformers continue that, even to the point where we get into the founding of the United States, and the early settlers who escaped Europe to get away from persecution became the persecutors. It's just one of those weird things of history but lest we think that us and the American Restoration Movement are so pure and our lineage is so white and we are so exempt from this mentality. One of the contemporaries of Alexander Campbell, by the name of Arthur Crefeld, edited a journal, and the title of that journal was The Heretic Detector. And so he went around looking at all the journals and listening to all the preachers and collecting all the information of all the heretics so that he could expose them. Alexander Campbell popped a cork. In one of Alexander Campbell's journals, I think it was it had to be the Millennial Harbinger. He published one of Arthur Crefeld's articles, and then for like the next 12 pages went on and on and on about how everything that Arthur Crefeld wrote was wrong. Okay, how did in Scripture, how are false teachers supposed to be handled? And so we look at some of these passages. 1 Corinthians 5 is clearly not dealing with a false teacher. 1 Corinthians 5 is talking about a man who has married his father's wife. It's immorality, gross immorality. But in 1 Corinthians 5, Paul says, put him out. Just get him out of the church. You don't have to put him in the stocks. You don't have to take his house. You don't have to put him in prison. Just get him, declare him to be persona non grata. He's no longer a part of your fellowship. 1 Timothy 1, 18 through 20, Paul talks about handing a couple of individuals over to Satan so that their soul could be, how did he say it? How did he put it? If I had a memory, I wouldn't have to do this. 1 Timothy 1, 18 to 20.
If you had a good memory, you'd probably be accused of being a heretic.
This charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance with the prophecies previously made about you, that by them you may wage good warfare, holding faith in good conscience. By rejecting this, some have made shipwreck of their faith, among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Now, what does that mean? We don't know, but it is certainly Paul didn't steal their property. He didn't put them in prison. He didn't torture them. He just said, I'm handing you over to Satan. I'm going to let Satan deal with you so that you will learn not to blaspheme. Titus 1, just a few pages over. Titus 1, 10 to 14. Let me see here. There are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers, and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. They must be silenced, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching the shameful gain what they ought not to teach. This testimony is true, therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and the commands of people who turn away from the truth. So rebuke them. Make it known that what they're teaching is wrong. 2 John 9, John in writing to regarding a false teacher here. Everyone who goes ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. So we do have some instructions about how to deal with false teachers. They are to be confronted. They are to be, their false teachings are to be recognized as false teachings. And if they continue, then you put them out of fellowship. You're not a part of us anymore. And the goal is to restore them. Actually, I thought I had, 2 Corinthians chapter 2. Paul talks about the one who has been put out of the church. And Paul says to receive him back. He's sorrowful, he's repented, he wants to come back. You are to receive him back so that Satan will not gain control of him. Right? So he's been punished enough, welcome him back. Is this the same guy that Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians chapter 5? Most people think so. But whatever the reason is, Paul says he's been punished enough. So welcome him back. The purpose of punishment or the purpose of any kind of discipline in the church is to bring that person back. not to kill them, not to take their property, not to put them in prison. Um, any questions or comments or thoughts about the Inquisition? Very, very black, dark period of the church.
So we could say that the early heretics were early reformers?
Could have been. Very, very well could have been individuals. And when we get to Martin Luther and John Calvin, we're going to talk about that, Cricket. During this period of time, the popes had that kind of authority that they could squash any kind of rebellion. By the time it got to Martin Luther could appeal to the what was called the elector in Germany, where he lived, and he could actually claim a little bit of protection. The Pope couldn't get to him. He was under a death sentence. If anybody had ever found Martin Luther, he would have been killed. But because the elector, because of the political authority that he was living under, and I forgot where it was he was living, he was shielded, he was protected. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about is as the papal power went down and the power of the civil authorities kind of climbed, that allowed the reformers to exist. Okay, excellent point. Okay, just real quickly then, we'll flip the page. We don't really have a lot to talk about here about scholasticism. I thought this quote was profound. Once again, it's in volume 5 of the book Philip Schaff, History of the Christian Church. We are dwarves as dwarves, mounted on the shoulders of giants. And I have heard that expression all my life, that we see further than other people because we're standing on their shoulders, so that we are able to see more and further than they. But this is not on account of any keenness of sight on our part or the height of our own bodies, but because we are lifted up on these giant forms. Our age enjoys the gift of preceding ages, and we know more, not because we excel in talent, but because we use the product of others who have gone before. This was written in 1140. So in 2025, that's why we can see further than they can, right? Very early on, the role of monks was to educate children and to copy and transcribe manuscripts. In the 12th century, so 1100s, this focus on education became more and more, became more focused, and it led to the establishment of what were called universities. One universe. Located centers of learning where various fields of study were divided. So a university is divided into different colleges, right? You have the College of Law, College of Medicine, College of Science, College of this, College of that. The primary divisions were the arts, including philosophy. Philosophy was always considered to be a liberal art. Law, which was a huge part of the Middle Ages, obviously medicine, and theology. And theology was considered the queen of the disciplines. And basically, if you wanted to become a theologian, you had to prove your ability to, you had to prove your knowledge and mastery of typically philosophy first, and then you could move over into the field of theology. This was kind of interesting to me, the development of the universities. The first ones being in Italy, Salerno and Bologna. I guess Bologna was where they invented lunch meat.
Oscar Mayer University.
Yes. Bad joke. bad joke. But then France, the University in Paris was huge in the development of scholasticism in education. Then England, Oxford and Cambridge, and then Spain, Palencia and Salamanca. The ranks of education were basically equated to the grades or the level of the guilds of workers. So if you were a beginning learner, you were considered a bachelor. And that was equated to an apprentice, someone who was just starting out in the field. Then you would be considered a licentiate, which would be somewhat equated to an assistant in a trade. You knew a little bit more about what you were doing. You knew enough not to stick your 2 wires to your tongue, you know. But you were one level above an apprentice. An apprentice was go get my wrench, you know, hold the nail so I can hammer it. You know? So assistants knew a little bit more. But then when you really climbed to the top of the ladder, you were referred to as a doctor or sometimes master. And this was the highest level in a guild, an artisan, a skilled tradesman. That would be the equivalent of a master tradesman. We have somewhat modified that. When you get your lowest level of a university instruction, we refer to as a bachelor degree. And although we don't often understand this, a bachelor's degree is basically a degree that allows you to start learning. You've mastered the fundamentals. Now you can go learn more about the trade in which you want to perform. Then our second level is referred to as a master's level. You have mastered whatever it is that you want to learn or to teach. Then if you really want to climb up to the top of the pyramid, the top of the triangle, then you achieve the doctorate, right? And at that point, you are supposed to then take your learning and share it with those who are below you. It is an honorary degree, a degree of honor, but it is for the purpose of you taking what you have learned and sharing it with others. I wanted to share a very interesting, to get a theological doctorate, you had to spend anywhere from 8 to 14 years. And the purpose of that was you had to go through so much preparatory work. Philosophy, literary arts, just knowing how to read different languages. A Juris Doctorate, lawyer, took typically around 8 years. To become a medical doctor was around 6 years. Interesting how these years, these numbers have changed over the years. I don't think it takes 8 years to become a lawyer anymore. 4 years, basically an undergraduate, and then another 2 or 3 to get your Juris Doctorate. Medical doctor, I would say probably today to become a full-fledged doctor probably takes closer to 8 years. 4 years of an undergraduate, then you go to medical school, then you get your residency, and then and all lectures and conversations in class were conducted in Latin because the process of learning was considered far too important and sacred to be trusted with the common vernacular. Anybody here have to take Latin in high school?
I didn't have to, but I did.
I wonder how many high schools even offer Latin anymore, Jeannie. But
Catholic schools.
possibly. Uh, here again, another Facebook post that I saw was like 100 years ago, you had to learn Latin in high school. Today, we have to teach you which bathroom to use. The changes. Passages to consider, a number of passages which promote wisdom and learning and being wise, but there is also an equivalent warning against false or worldly wisdom. The final point that I wanted to make about scholasticism is this, that regardless of what we think about the monks, regardless of what we think about monasticism, our entire educational process, our entire educational system is built on the foundation of the monks. You stop and think about it, all of our university system, even our lower grades, elementary school, high school, it's all focused on this idea of, see, when Jesus was walking around on the earth, you might find a rabbi that you liked and you would apply, can I be your disciple? And he would teach you what he knew. But your education would be focused directly on that one rabbi. In a university system, you have many different teachers, but you have one field of study. So we don't find a teacher that we like and say, hey, teach me everything that you know. We go to a school and we decide on a major, and we learn from a whole bunch of different teachers who give us the accumulation of all of their knowledge so that we might more completely, fully understand that field. Oh, this is an interesting God. Any thoughts or questions or observations about learning? Okay, let's take a break as we get folks coming in. Let's get ready for our worship service.